The Second Sex, French, Le Deuxième Sexe, is a 1949 book by the French existentialist Simone de Beauvoir, in which the author discusses the treatment of women throughout history. Beauvoir researched and wrote the book in about 14 months between 1946 and 1949. She published it in 2 volumes, Facts and Myths and Lived Experience, Les Faits et les Mythes and l'Expérience vécue in French. Some chapters first appeared in Les Temps modernes. One of Beauvoir's best-known books, The Second Sex, is often regarded as a major work of feminist philosophy and the starting point of second-wave feminism. Summary Volume 1. Beauvoir asks, what is woman? She argues that man is considered the default, while woman is considered the other. Thus humanity is male and man defines woman not herself but as relative to him. Beauvoir describes the relationship of ovum to sperm in various creatures, fish, insects, mammals, leading up to the human being. She describes women's subordination to the species in terms of reproduction, compares the physiology of men and women, concluding that values cannot be based on physiology and that the facts of biology must be viewed in light of the ontological, economic, social, and physiological context. Authors whose views Beauvoir rejects include Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, and Friedrich Engels. Beauvoir argues that while Engels, in his The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, 1884, maintained that the great historical defeat of the female sex is the result of the invention of bronze and the emergence of private property, his claims are unsupported. According to Beauvoir, 2 factors explain the evolution of women's condition: participation in production and freedom from reproductive slavery. Beauvoir writes that motherhood left woman riveted to her body like an animal and made it possible for men to dominate her and nature. She describes man's gradual domination of women, starting with the statue of a female great goddess found in Susa, and eventually the opinion of ancient Greeks like Pythagoras, who wrote, "There is a good principle that created order, light and man, and a bad principle that created chaos, darkness and woman. Men succeed in the world by transcendence, but immanence is the lot of women." Beauvoir writes that men oppress women when they seek to perpetuate the family and keep patrimony intact. She compares women's situation in ancient Greece with Rome. In Greece, with exceptions like Sparta where there were no restraints on women's freedom, women were treated almost like slaves. In Rome, because men were still the masters, women enjoyed more rights but, still discriminated against on the basis of their sex, had only empty freedom. Through the 19th century women's legal status remained unchanged, but individuals, like Marguerite de Navarre, excelled by writing and acting. Some men helped women's status through their works. Beauvoir finds fault with the Napoleonic Code, criticizes Auguste Coté and Honoré de Balzac, and describes Pierre-Joseph Proudhon as an anti-feminist. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century gave women an escape from their homes, but they were paid little for their work. Beauvoir traces the growth of trade unions and participation by women. She examines the spread of birth control methods and the history of abortion. Beauvoir relates the history of women's suffrage, and writes that women like Rosa Luxemburg and Marie Curie brilliantly demonstrate that it is not women's inferiority that has determined their historical insignificance, it is their historical insignificance that has doomed them to inferiority. Beauvoir provides a presentation about the everlasting disappointment of women, for the most part from a male heterosexual's point of view. She covers female menstruation, virginity, and female sexuality, including copulation, marriage, motherhood, and prostitution. To illustrate man's experience of the horror of feminine fertility, Beauvoir quotes the British Medical Journal of 1878, in which a member of the British Medical Association writes, "It is an indisputable fact that meat goes bad when touched by menstruating women." She quotes poetry by André Breton, Léopold Sédar Senghor, Michel Leiris, Paul Verlaine, Edgar Allan Poe, Paul Valéry, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and William Shakespeare, along with other novels, philosophers, and films. Beauvoir writes that sexual division is maintained in homosexuality. Examining the work of Henry de Montauban, D. H. Lawrence, Paul Claudel, André Breton, and Stendhal, Beauvoir writes that these examples show that the great collective myths are reflected in each singular writer. Feminine devotion is demanded as a duty by Montelaner and Lawrence, less arrogant. Claudel, Breton, and Stendhal admire it as a generous choice. She finds that woman is the privileged other, that other is defined in the way the one chooses to posit himself, and writes that, but the only earthly destiny reserved to the woman equal, child woman, soul sister, woman sex, and female animal is always man. Volume 2 presenting a child's life beginning with birth, Beauvoir contrasts a girl's upbringing with a boy's, who at age 3 or 4 is told he is a little man. A girl is taught to be a woman and her feminine destiny is imposed on her by society. She has no innate maternal instinct. A girl comes to believe in and to worship a male god and to create imaginary adult lovers. The discovery of sex is a phenomenon as painful as weaning and she views it with disgust. When she discovers that men, not women, are the masters of the world, this imperiously modifies her consciousness of herself. Beauvoir describes puberty, the beginning of menstruation, and the way girls imagine sex with a man. She relates several ways that girls in their late teens accept their femininity, which may include running away from home, fascination with the disgusting, following nature, or stealing. Beauvoir describes sexual relations with men, maintaining that the repercussions of the first of these experiences informs a woman's whole life. Beauvoir describes women's sexual relations with women. She writes that homosexuality is no more a deliberate perversion than a fatal curse. Beauvoir thinks marriage is a perverted institution oppressing both men and women. In Beauvoir's view, abortions performed legally by doctors would have little risk to the mother. She argues that the Catholic Church cannot make the claim that the souls of the unborn would not end up in heaven because of their lack of baptism, because that would be contradictory to other church teachings. According to Beauvoir, while a woman knows how to be as active, effective and silent as a man, her situation keeps her being useful, preparing food, clothes, and lodging. She worries because she does not do anything, she complains, she cries, and she may threaten suicide. She protests but doesn't escape her lot. She may achieve happiness in harmony and the good as illustrated by Virginia Woolf and Catherine Mansfield. Beauvoir thinks it is pointless to try to decide whether a woman is superior or inferior, and that it is obvious that the man's situation is infinitely preferable. She writes, "For woman there is no other way out than to work for her liberation." Among writers, Beauvoir chooses only Emily Bronte, Woolf and, sometimes, Mary Webb, and she mentions Collett and Mansfield, as among those who have tried to approach nature in its inhuman freedom. Beauvoir then says that women don't challenge the human condition and that in comparison to the few greats, a woman comes out as mediocre and will continue at that level for quite some time. A woman could not have been Vincent van Gogh or Franz Kafka. Beauvoir thinks that perhaps, of all women, only Saint Teresa lived her life for herself. She says it is high time a woman be left to take her own chances. In her conclusion, Beauvoir looks forward to a future when women and men are equals, something the Soviet Revolution promised but did not ever deliver. She concludes that, to carry off this supreme victory, men and women must, among other things and beyond their natural differentiations, unequivocally affirm their brotherhood.